The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty and most merciful God, today we remember before you those whom it would be easy for us to forget, the homeless and the destitute, the old and the sick, and all who have none to care for them. Help us to heal those who are broken in body or spirit and turn their sorrow into joy. Grant this, Father, for the sake of your Son, who for our sake became poor, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning and welcome. I'm going to turn it over to the Reverend Jay Kanzler, who's going to introduce our presenters for today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sticking around, being here. I'm going to start by reading just a quick parable, the Good Samaritan. Then a lawyer, like me, stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said, what is written in the law? What do you read there? And he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind and your neighbor as yourself. And he said, you have given the right answer, do this and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, the lawyer, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place, saw him pass by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him into the inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? He said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. So I read that today because our presenters are Ned Presnell and Michelle Charbonneir, and I know them from MoNet, which they'll tell you about. Ned is a licensed clinical social worker who works with adolescents and adults, couples, families. He received his master's degree in social work from WashU. And among other endeavors and clinical practices, Ned is on the board, or is the president of the board of directors of MoNet, and a university research collaborator, and at one time was a Catholic seminarian. Michelle Charbonneir is the executive director of MoNet and is a therapist specializing in addiction. And MoNet was founded in 2015 as a grassroots harm reduction organization offering a syringe service program, naloxone, education, and family support. And in 2018, it received funding to operate a recovery community center. MoNetwork is a leader in harm reduction efforts in Missouri and is leading the way as a harm reduction-based peer-led recovery community center. I'm going to let Ned and Michelle tell you all about what that is, but thank you both so much for being here.
Excuse me, Ned. I don't usually take the microphone right out of somebody's hand. Cheryl Meyer, who is coordinating the estate sale that I hope you've had a chance to visit in the back, has asked me to let you know that they want to take any and all of the money that you have to spend, but not during the forum. So as soon as we're finished, please go back and visit the estate sale, and thank you for your support of it. Ned.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having us today. I hope you'll indulge me in reflecting a bit on what we do in light of the gospel and our faith. MoNetwork is not a Christian organization, but the work we do is with truly the most hard-off people in St. Louis, people that are addicted to fentanyl. I'll say that a lot probably through the presentation, people addicted to fentanyl. And you're like, well, what is that? Why is that so important? And really today's person addicted to fentanyl is what we used to think of as a person addicted to heroin. Only there's really no heroin in the drug supply anymore. We used to think of heroin as being the most dangerous thing possible, but fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin, cheaper to make, and has completely replaced the opioid drug supply. So when you hear me say addicted to fentanyl, just think addicted to heroin if that is more familiar to you. I love coming to church. I was really happy to come and be invited. Church is a big part of my upbringing. I was raised Catholic. My parents had us involved from a young age, and they led the choir, and all the songs of church are very familiar to me. I entered the seminary, as Jay said, and spent 5 years as a Jesuit and really was formed by that experience. Church is a warm place because it's where we celebrate everything good in our lives and also where we receive consolation in difficult times. It's a home. It's a spiritual home. It's where we celebrate baptisms and marriages and births and where we let people go when they die. But Jesus, in his life, was very much interested in the people who did not have a spiritual home. For whatever reason, in the society of that time, the lepers, the disabled, the prostitutes, he would leave his religious community and he would go out and he would find these folks that really did not have a home, a spiritual home, a place of belonging. And I was reflecting on that. I was reflecting on, well, today, the heroin addict or the person addicted to fentanyl is the leper of today. 100,000 people die of drug overdose every year. I've been giving presentations on this topic for a long time, and so I remember when we said, hey, for the first time this year, drug overdose deaths has surpassed car accidents. That was about in 2008. Today, more than twice as many people every year die of drug overdose than car accidents. We've become so accustomed to it, it's now just endemic as part of our culture. It's the number one cause of accidental death. It's the number one cause of death, of accidental death, period. It's the number one cause of death for people under 50 years old. It's remarkable, right? It's become a scourge on our entire country. In John 9, chapter 2, Jesus' disciples come up to him and they say, hey, you're talking to a man who was born blind. Why was he born blind? Was it because of his sins, or was it because of his parents' sins? Today, those are the questions we ask about people who have addiction. Did their parents not raise them right? Or did they just make really bad decisions? That is the person, and Jesus said in that chapter 3, he says, it's not for either of those reasons. People are not born with a vulnerability to addiction, a vulnerability to illness, a vulnerability to disability because of their sins or their parents' sins. It's just so that the work of God can be revealed in them. Mo Network, in our day jobs, and Michelle and my day jobs, we try to help people overcome addiction. And we try to help people overcome mental health problems, and we treat them with cognitive behavioral therapy and medication and all of those things. In our work at Mo Network, we just try to give dignity to people who may be incurable, may be like the lepers of Jesus' time, for whom they didn't know what to do because they were contagious and because they were frightening and because they were truly incurable at that time. Today, leprosy is gone really from our world for the most part because we're able to cure it. But the leprosy of today is fentanyl addiction. There are treatments, but they don't work well enough to prevent 100,000 people a year from dying. And the people that are addicted to fentanyl don't generally have a spiritual home or even generally a home at all. Obviously, many do, but many people are homeless that come to our services. So Mo Network is there not to try to fix the person with addiction, but just to offer them kindness and dignity and to try to prevent the harm that is caused by their addiction. So we call that harm reduction versus treatment. I'll talk a little bit about that. Harm reduction says, hey, we can't fix everything in this world, but we know that people that are the worst off, like people that are addicted to fentanyl, still deserve kindness and dignity and support, and so we can provide those things to them. Our primary services are people who come into our building a few times a week, or we go out into the community to the hardest hit places in St. Louis, the places where people are actually selling and using drugs, where there's prostitution, and we provide the same services out there. We provide naloxone overdose reversal. There's a nasal spray that if you encounter someone who has overdosed from opioids, you give them nasal spray just like you were treating a cold, right? Allergies, and they come back to life. It is incredibly effective. Now, it doesn't cure their addiction. They're going to want to go out and use again that day, that minute, really. but it does give them a second chance or a third chance to continue kind of fighting the good fight. We have some available. I don't know if you bring some. If you want to take some home with you, it's not a bad thing to have on hand. We give it out constantly all over the state.
Let them know that if you're not addicted, it does nothing to you.
Yeah, it's a completely benign medication. It just kind of washes out the opioid receptors, and so the way people die from opioid addiction is they take too much opioid, and it causes respiratory depression. They just suffocate. But the naloxone reverses that, and the breath comes back. And that's why if you ever see an overdose reversal in a movie, you see the person gasping, they get their breath again. It's that simple. I mean, opioids are a fairly clean drug in the sense that they don't cause a lot of harm to the body, but if they're used in great quantities, they cause respiratory depression. We provide sterile syringes. And the reason for that is that people that are addicted to fentanyl use fentanyl over and over again. It's a short-acting drug, and so they have to use it multiple times a day to prevent themselves from being ill. And so if they use syringes that have already been used, they're at very high risk for transmitting hepatitis or getting hepatitis or HIV. You know, giving out syringes to people that are using drugs is sometimes hard for people to swallow. Like you're actually giving them the implement that they're going to use the drug with. They're going to use the drug anyway. These are people that are very, very addicted to the drug, and so this just prevents them from having to manage 2 or 3 chronic illnesses instead of 1. Because if they transmit HIV or they get HIV or hepatitis, now they have to deal with that health problem. Harm reduction tries to reduce the harm caused by the illness by providing these services. Not to mention that if you really need to take an economic approach to it, the burden of disease on taxpayers in Missouri for treating HIV and hepatitis in this population is very high. If we prevent it through a needle that costs a couple cents, it's a very good investment of resources as well. So those are probably the most medical services we provide: the overdose reversal and the syringes. But wrapped around that, we just try to provide kindness and dignity to the people that come to our clinic. So we provide food, showers. We allow them to shower, food, clothing, companionship. We have open mic nights where people can come up and just enjoy life. And that's another thing. People are like, what? People that are addicted to heroin want to come to an open mic night? Yeah, they're still alive. They're still human beings. They still have relationships. They still have desires. They just can't stop using the drug. That's it. Now, that's another thing that is confusing if you've never been addicted to anything. How can somebody become so addicted that they're putting themselves at risk for death, homelessness, where they're really breaking all the attachments in their lives in order to maintain this one attachment to the drug? And for years and years and years, I've been trying to come up with good metaphors. I don't know that this will do justice, but it's one of the better ones I have. Imagine if this whole room, kind of bars came over the windows. We were all locked in here, the windows and doors, and we were all locked in here. And then the temperature started to go down. What would happen is our survival system would start to kick in. First, we'd just be a little cold, and we'd start to huddle together. We'd be kind of rational. We'd be like, okay, hey, what's going on? We check the doors and windows. But once we found that we were here and trapped, and once the temperature got low enough, we'd start to panic a bit, right? Be like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling really cold, and we don't have the resources to kind of keep our body temperatures up. We'd huddle together. We'd use our resources. But eventually, as the temperature got lower and lower and lower, our survival systems would come in and we'd become desperate. Some people would become very, very afraid. Some people would become very, very angry. So now imagine, you can take that as far as you want to go in terms of your imagination of desperation. And then imagine that from the ceiling, blankets came down. Electric blankets. We don't have those anymore, do we? When I grew up, we huddled ourselves in these dangerous electric blankets. These really, really warm blankets. But on the blankets, there was a sign that said, feel free to use these blankets, but they're covered in anthrax. As the temperature lowered, all of us probably, maybe there's a couple real stalwarts out here, but all of us probably have a breaking point where we say, you know what? I can't take this. I'll take my chances. That is the reality. That's that intense activation of the survival system. It's the limbic system, if you're familiar with the science of it, this survival drive in the human person. That cycle of looking at the solution, trying to resist it, and then giving into it, this is what a person addicted to fentanyl goes to multiple times a day. I was once running a group of people that were trying to overcome heroin addiction. We have medications that help also a lot if we can help people get on them, but so that's very challenging. And I said, how many times have you tried to quit in your life? And one of the young people said, I tell myself I'm going to quit every single time I use. Every time I put the blanket on myself and feel warm, and then the cycle starts again, and I start to get cold, and I start to wait, and I try to resist. Every time I tell myself I'm going to have a better life, I get the relief. I say, okay, this time it's going to be different, but it's just too powerful. And again, think of that. So many people are trapped in this type of bondage. So many that 100,000 people a year die of it. So if 100,000 people are dying, I actually know the statistic, it's about 1.5 million people, 1.5 to 2 million that have used heroin or fentanyl in the last year. About the same number, because I was doing my research, that there are Episcopalians in the United States. Your congregation is about the same size as that congregation. But when you think of that bondage, I was doing my research. I was raised Catholic, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't say anything that was, I didn't know what the Anglican differences were between Anglican and Catholicism. And so I was praying, and I was thinking this morning, I was reading, and I stumbled upon the Articles of Religion, which are the Anglican Articles of Religion. And Article 10 says, of free will. The condition of the human person after the fall of Adam is such that he or she cannot turn and prepare themselves by their own natural strength and good works to faith and calling upon God. Wherefore, we have no power to do good works, pleasant and acceptable to God, without the grace of God by Christ preventing, which I realize means coming before us, that we may have a good will, and working with us when we have that goodwill. So the doctrine of free will and grace in Anglicanism is that none of us have the ability, that we all have a bonded free will, and it's only by the grace of God that we find freedom to do good works. If that's the case, then the person addicted to fentanyl, that person is the symbol of our bondage in this world. That is the most extreme form of bondage visually for us as a symbol, but we all suffer from that same thing. It's only by grace that any of us are more free to do good works, to be part of a church community, than that person addicted to fentanyl, at least by the teachings of the church. So I don't have much more to say than that. I wanted to make you aware. We're going to take questions. I'm going to ask Michelle to describe in more detail the services that we provide. But I did want to, you're all welcome to, we can always use many things at our organization. We're a nonprofit, obviously. We can use donations. We have funding as a recovery community center to have staff that provides for our staff. We're always growing. We just bought a new building. But some of the supplies that we give, federal funds can't pay for the syringes. They cannot pay for food. So a lot of the things that the members most want that come to visit us, we can't pay for except with donations. So if you feel drawn to that, you can look in our brochure. There's ways to donate there. We always need volunteers. If you want to see yourself just as a volunteer or just as an observer, you want to come and you want to meet our participants, every Wednesday is usually a really good day to come to visit. Just contact Michelle. You can come down to where we work, and you can see it's a very warm and loving place. The disease itself sounds horrible, but the services, when you come there on a Wednesday, it just seems like a little community of people helping one another. Food and showers and conversation. And one service I didn't mention is we do wound care because people that inject IV drugs, develop abscesses and infections. We also have people come in and do wound care. It's a very loving and warm place, and you'd be welcome to come visit and see if that would be a type of place you'd like to volunteer. And I'll let Michelle kind of talk about the other services and the schedule of services. But do you have any questions for me? Do you want to come up here, actually? Any questions for either of us? Yeah.
Where do 1.5 million people get fentanyl?
I'll let you answer.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Where do you get fentanyl? Not as easily as you can access alcohol because they don't have it, at gas stations and things like that. But close to gas stations, you can go through the streets and easily find it. You can go and so one thing I should say is our practice is in Ladue.
Yeah.
And the Mo network is in South City, right? And I have people come to my practice in Ladue, that live in Clayton, that access these drugs right here. So you can really get it anywhere.
So it's not legal.
No.
No.
No, none of the fentanyl that people are, well, almost none of the fentanyl that people are overdosing from, that's also confusing to people, is medical fentanyl. The fentanyl is produced by drug cartels, shipped into the United States, but it's so cheap. Back when heroin was the drug that was killing people, in order to make heroin, the cartels had to, oh, you can't, can you hear me? The cartels had to grow poppies. You had to have fields and fields and fields of poppies and extract the opium and convert it into heroin. Fentanyl is just made from chemicals in a lab. So it mimics heroin, it's 50 times stronger, but it's so cheap and easy. Look, you can get high on heroin for less than it costs to go to a movie. It's just so cheap and easy, and so anybody that wants to get it.
High on fentanyl.
What did I say?
Heroin.
Oh yeah, fentanyl. You can get high on fentanyl, yeah, for the cost of going to a movie.
Just to close this, it's a
Yeah.
law enforcement issue then, isn't it?
It's what?
It's a law enforcement issue. You shouldn't let it in.
Yes. I mean, no, you know what? I am. The war on drugs has been such a failure that most of us in the harm reduction organizations say, well, yes, it's a law enforcement issue that nobody's been able to solve. Recently, I've become a little bit more sympathetic to the idea that we better find a way, because only about 1 out of 10 people that have this addiction in a given year get any kind of treatment or services. So the other 9, those are the people that are, at a higher risk for dying. We can't treat our way out of the problem if there's such a big treatment gap between the number of people affected by the illness and the number of people who get services. If you get a medication after an overdose in the hospital, if you get methadone or buprenorphine, which are the 2 FDA-approved medications for opioid addiction, you have a 70% lower chance of dying the following year. But if you don't get those medications, you have a 1 in 10 chance of dying. In 1 year, 12-month mortality. So this is a very, very lethal illness, and yet we're only treating a small proportion of the problem. So if we don't control the supply, to your point, we will never really overcome it unless people just stop using. And there does seem to be sort of a natural history to drug epidemics that basically we just become familiar enough with how bad it is that people do stop using or it becomes less popular. But drug overdose deaths have been rising for 3 decades, so we probably also need to figure out a way to deal with supply.
Is there anything being done to educate people about the dangers of fentanyl?
Yeah, so part of harm reduction and part of the work that we do is to educate. We talk to them about safer use, and we don't just give out syringes. We give out other tools that are less risky when used as opposed to injecting. And so we talk about how to be safe when you're using. It's really important. We go to schools, we go to churches, I travel all over the country talking about this, educating people. And it's no different than going to the store and buying your alcohol with the warning on it that says this can cause blah, 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 blah. Or your cigarettes that say this can cause lung cancer, da, 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 da. Yes, we educate people as much as we possibly can.
And there are organizations in St. Louis that are specifically given that mission of education, like Prevent Ed, and they get different funding streams for that. But think about, by the time someone decides to use fentanyl, there's usually a level of desperation in their lives or a level of disregard for their own health that education really doesn't get through.
Can you explain, and maybe, I'd be interested in knowing how many people here, 2 years ago, my best friend OD'd on fentanyl, but I would imagine that there are others here. But talk about how people start off with prescription opioids for a knee surgery and end up in South St. Louis on South Broadway injecting fentanyl.
Yeah. This goes back to like the government has in some ways created this problem as opposed to actually solve or support in any way. When there was a huge push in the like 90s to prescribe opioids by the pharmaceutical companies, prescribe these, pushing the doctors to prescribe them. Doctors start prescribing them. Doctors start over-prescribing them. People become dependent on them, physically dependent on them, and then there became laws created to stop that. So they came down on the doctors, they came down on pharmacies, they came down on the people that were using, and created laws that basically said you'll go to jail, you'll do this, you'll have to do this if you are abusing a prescription pain pill. So then that drives these people who are physically dependent. This is a physical dependency, just like diabetics need insulin. Once you become dependent on these drugs, your body needs it. The people that no longer are getting their prescription pain pills from their doctors were forced to go to the streets to find alternatives. And that could come in, illegal selling of pain pills, but it could also come in the form of heroin. So then heroin became predominant. And then strict laws came down on the heroin use. If you use heroin, we're going to send you to prison. All these different types of laws. So when stricter laws come down on one substance, it drives the supply to a different substance. So to replace the heroin came fentanyl. And now they're coming down with harder laws on fentanyl, and so our drug supply is changing once again, and we are seeing other opioids in the supply. So
yeah, a big part of driving the opioid epidemic was prescription drugs, and there was a time when 80% or so of people that used heroin had used a prescription opioid first. That's no longer the case. Prescription opioid use has declined over the past 5 years. But heroin and fentanyl use has increased. So now people are directly accessing, for their first use of opioids, these drugs. They are very common. So we still have a problem even though we have restricted prescription opioids.
Do other countries have the same problem we do, or is it unique to the United States?
Other countries do have the problem. Switzerland has a very famously has a park where there's a lot of heroin and fentanyl use. Canada has a horrible problem. The UK, the developed world, Russia has a terrible, terrible problem. It's all over the world, but the magnitude is higher in the United States. We could, question why that is, but the number of people who die is we are up towards the top. But
is there any effort to get these countries together to at least find common bond in how to fight this together?
Yeah, the problem is it's just so easy to make and so easy to ship. If you could figure out how to keep illegal things from being shipped into the country, most of the fentanyl now is made in China, in labs and shipped over, and we can't regulate shipping. We just can't do it. There's just too much of it, and we can't. Oftentimes comes through Mexico. We just cannot figure out a way to keep illegal things coming across those borders. I'm not law enforcement. I don't have the answer, but I know that law enforcement doesn't have the answer either.
Does China have the same problem we do?
China has a yes, they have a problem. They're very strict. They'll incarcerate people for any use. It's a very, very strict government over there, as you know. But they do. They have a very widespread opioid problem and a lot of methadone clinics to treat it. So yes, they have it as well.
And I would say that, as we're talking about this, we're looking at approaching this problem from the top down, which needs to happen. Harm reductionists like myself meet all the time, have these discussions, try to influence our congressmen, try to educate people on this, try to offer solutions. But ultimately, what we really do is try to reach this from the ground up, because this is so layered, right? The reason people are using and continue to use is not just because of the addiction, but of trauma because of the way they were raised, because of what they've endured. They don't have stable housing. They don't have stable food. They don't have anywhere to take a shower. And when your basic needs aren't being met, of course you're going to do whatever you can do to make yourself feel better for even just a few minutes, right? And so for us, we try to meet these people where they're at and show them complete and unconditional radical love. To let them know that they are worthy of love, that they deserve dignity, and that we're going to do just that.
Yeah, going back to the Good Samaritan story that Reverend Kansler began with, we could ask the question, why were those robbers on that road? How could we have better criminal justice system so that the robbers didn't, assault the Samaritan or the I guess Israelite? We could ask the question, what was he doing alone? Like, we could ask all kinds of questions, but the Good Samaritan didn't ask those questions. Didn't say, well, I want to know what why this person ended up they didn't even know probably how he was left for dead. He just found this person in true human bondage, left for dead, and lovingly responded. I love to think about how to solve big problems, but as a Christian, I just feel called to deal with the person in front of me. And the people that in front of me that we seem to be most called to help as Christians are those people who are in the greatest bondage in our world. And I propose today that person is the person addicted to fentanyl in our culture today. That today, the person addicted to fentanyl is the person on the side of the road. We don't know how they got there. We don't know why they got there. We might want to say, was it the sins of their parents or their sins that made them end up there? But they're there. And the gospel seems to say that we treat them with kindness. We even go out of our own expense and we pay the innkeeper to make sure that they feel better the next day. Does that mean that all the problems of that person are solved? No. But that does seem to be what the message, one of the Christian messages.
If I could share a little bit more about what we do at Mo Network, like I said, it really is radical love. And for all my staff, I'm like, if you can't embrace the concept of radical love and show that to everyone coming to receive our services, probably wouldn't be a good fit with us, because that's what we embody. People come into our office and they are welcomed, they are greeted, they are looked in the eye, because how many of us walk down the street and see somebody unhoused and we look the other way? That is not what we do here. We look you in the eye, we ask you how you're doing, and we mean it. We really want to know how you're doing. We ask how we can help you, how can we support you, and we do everything we can to meet your needs. So he named some of our services: supplies, safe use supplies, safe sex kits, wound care kits. We actually do wound care. We have 2 wound care specialists. The majority of people that work at the center are certified peer specialists, meaning they are in long-term recovery themselves and have been trained to serve as a peer, to work one-on-one with people. Showers, free hair, everything we do is free, but haircuts, open mic nights, game nights, like just give them a community to come together and have fun. I remember one time one of our participants came and told me about one of our events. I think it was our Christmas party, and said, I had so much fun for that 2 hours. It was so great to be around a community. It was so great to see the kids getting gifts. And for those entire 2 hours, I didn't even think about using. To me, that is a win, and that is what we're here to do. We go out into the streets and take our services there. So our office is in South City, but we serve North City and downtown. We go to the encampments and serve the unhoused. I'm probably forgetting half of what we do. The mail-based naloxone, we do that, so anybody in rural Missouri that doesn't have access to centers like ours can get to on our website and actually request us to send them naloxone. We do fentanyl test strips. We do drug checking. So our participants give us samples of what they are using, and we work with the county medical examiner. We take their samples to the lab, and we find out what's actually in the supplies and give that information to them, because information is power. To have correct information enables you to make better decisions.
Yeah, the fentanyl test strips are an issue because I went to a funeral for a 22-year-old from West County who used what he thought were 4 Percocets. Percocets, prescription opioids. They looked exactly like Percocets. He bought them from a friend. But nowadays, the people who sell the drugs have become very sophisticated and just buy these very cheap presses, and they press pills. that look like pharmaceutical grade pills because they get a lot more money for them. If I can sell, we don't really, OxyContin isn't really sold as much anymore for a lot of reasons. But back in the day, that's what they call hillbilly heroin. That was the drug that people were trying to get. If I could press something to look like an OxyContin, I could get $1 a milligram. Whereas for a bag of fentanyl, I get very little. So the people that are selling the drugs will often press these. Well, this kid used these, they had fentanyl in them, and he died. I mean, 4 pills wouldn't kill a baby. So this is a regular Percocet. And so this is a big problem. And so we encourage people, I mean, kids, you just got to tell these days, they cannot put anything in their mouths that they don't know that isn't prescribed by their doctor, because they get these pills at school but test strips allow people who are using drugs, who have addiction, to test and see if there's fentanyl in them, basically.
Anybody else have a burning desire? Otherwise, I know that people, go, please.
Oh, no, that's okay. What were you going to say?
I was just going to wrap it up, but
Oh, I was curious. I recently read an article about, it focused on a woman who was pregnant, and this article stated that 1 in 20 pregnancies are affected by fentanyl, and that if you had a problem, the amount of fentanyl in any drug that you're going to get on the street has gone up from, this amount. It had a graph up to like 100%. So I'm guessing that's true, and that fentanyl caused these horrible wounds at the needle site. It's forming like necrotic tissue or something that just makes it, opening them up to a lot more. Is that all correct?
Relatively, yes. So the wounds are actually caused by what is called xylazine, that is now in our drug supply, and that's why we do wound care. It's one of our biggest needs of our participants is to have their wounds treated.
Sorry, it was the xylazine that's gone up, Joanne.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and pregnancy, opioid use disorder in pregnancy is a big deal. There's some good clinics, like the Wish Clinic, in places where people are addicted to fentanyl. Women that have pregnancy and who are addicted can get it prioritized to get on the medications that stabilize them, and then they can, have perfectly healthy child on these medications. But it's very hard to control a fentanyl addiction, obviously, when you're pregnant.
I want to thank Ned Presnell and Michelle Charbonnier. I'm so proud to be a part of the organization and work with them, but what they do on a daily basis is spectacular. Okay, Dudley?
We're talking about stuff, and I just, my heart is just, head is pounding. And, but we're a state that legalizes marijuana. I mean, how does that, all this stuff you start with, do we not think about the implications?
You know what? I'll let these guys. That's such a huge question. Do you have any thoughts, either of you?
I have lots of thoughts to that. I have lots of thoughts to that. That's a whole nother conversation. I'm not against legalizing things. That if we could legalize substances, less people would die because it would be regulated by our government and our supplies would not be contaminated. But what I would say to that is that you're not going to not drink because look at prohibition. It didn't work, right? And I would also say follow the money because that's what it comes down to.
Oh, yeah. I'm extremely conflicted by the legalization because there's so many harms caused by criminalization and there's so many harms caused by legalization. I really just don't think that question is going to help us either way, really. We treat a lot more marijuana dependents now than we did 10 years ago because the marijuana supply is so much stronger than it used to be. But there's also, so many people lost so much of their livelihood and lives from selling marijuana that probably didn't need to. So it's a challenging issue.
As Christians, oftentimes we can, it seems like a teaspoon of water out of the ocean as we meet people and try to help them. And in their world, our world, that's very much the case. But I'm so glad they're doing it. If you are so inclined, they'll be around to talk. Please visit the website. And thank you so much for spending some time, and thank you for what you do.
Yeah, thanks so much.